Now that we have the file saved, we can go ahead and continue working. So we're going to start adding a computer desk in this area. Let's go ahead and start with that. Now what I like to do is take objects from the previous objects that we have here, because then we don't have to reapply these modifiers. So let's select our wall, tap into edit mode, and then using the face selection mode, we're going to select this face, Shift D to duplicate, right click to cancel, and then press P and separate the object. Now we can go ahead and tap into edit mode with that new object that we just copied. And then we're going to press A to select everything, and then we're going to scale this along the y-axis to make it smaller. So we're creating a drawer, and then in the object mode we can right click, set origin point to geometry, and then we can just move it slightly up like that. And we're going to move this on the y-axis closer to this part. Tap into edit mode, and we're going to move this slightly on the x-axis like that. Again, I'm just fine-tuning the position. And then we're going to extrude this out, so E to extrude it out like that. A to select everything, add bevel weight, and then we're going to select this front face, I to inset, and move this inwards so that we have... Now I'm creating a stylized room, so I want to make sure everything is cute and rounded. That's why we're adding these sort of really thick edges and stuff. And then we're going to press E to extrude, and we're going to keep moving it until it sort of disappears there. And we're just going to move it slightly back like that. Left click to finish, A to select everything, add bevel weight. Now we're going to select that face in the back, Shift D to duplicate, right click to cancel the movement, and then separate by selection. By now you should have a pretty good idea how we're doing this. And then we're going to grab this along x-axis to move it to the front like that. Tap into edit mode, and then we're going to go ahead and add some loop cuts. Let's add about 4 loop cuts, and we're going to cancel the movement. And now we're going to enable X-ray mode, switch to vertex selection mode, select these vertices, and then we're going to press X and then delete these vertices. Now we're going to turn off the X-ray mode, A to select everything, add bevel weight, and then we're going to press E to extrude. And let's just add an extrusion like this. Again, A to select everything and add bevel weight. And then we're going to add a loop cut in the center like this, and we're going to increase that to 2 cuts. Left click to finish, and then cancel the movement, and we're going to do the same thing again. And we're going to scale this along the y-axis, just like that. And again, if you make a selection from the front, it's only going to select what's visible to you and not the vertices on the back. So to make a selection like that, make sure that you're in the X-ray mode or wireframe mode. And then we're going to make a selection like that, and grab along z-axis, A to select everything, add bevel weight, and again we're going to sort of fine-tune the shape a little bit until we're sort of happy with the result. And now we're going to grab this along the x-axis to move it in like that, and then we're going to add a modifier. Under generate, we're going to add array modifier, scroll down, and then by default it's adding new objects on the x-axis. We're going to set that to 0. And we're going to enable this onto -1 for the z-axis, so that is adding towards the bottom. And then we can just increase the number of cuts, a number of copies, and just like that we have this drawer completed. And now we can tap into edit mode for the drawer, copy this top face, and then separate that by selection. Tap into edit mode with that new object. We're going to select this edge, grab this along the y-axis to move it all the way to that end of the wall, like that. And then we're going to select everything, E to extrude, add the thickness. Again, we can fine-tune the thickness later on if we need to. And then we're going to select everything and add the bevel weight. Okay. Then we're going to add an edge loop closer to sort of this part. Select this face, A to extrude, A to select everything, and then add bevel weight. Switch to edge selection mode and select this edge loop here. And then Control B to bevel, and we're going to increase the number of cuts. Let's go with 3, 4, 5 loop cuts, and we're going to make it more rounder like that. And now we're going to Alt click on this edge loop so that this sort of part is selected. Hold down Shift and Alt and click on this to select both of these, and then increase the bevel weight. And just like that, we have the tabletop. And now we need to create 2 legs for this table. And to do that more easily, let's go to the top view. Shift right click on this area so that the new object is added here. And then we're going to press Shift A to open. and add a circle. Let's click on the operators panel and change the size to about 8, so that it's easier to work with this. Later on, if we need to add more detail, we can add a subdiv modifier. And finally, we can tap into edit mode, A to select everything, and then scale it down. We're going to scale it even further like that. And now we can just grab this along z-axis to move it to the bottom side like that. And now we're going to tap into edit mode, F to fill this, and then we're going to press E to extrude. Make sure that you're in the edit mode, F to fill, and then E to extrude, and we're going to move this to the bottom like that, and then tap out of edit mode. And then also we can add subdiv modifier by pressing Control 2 on the keyboard, and it's going to add a subdiv modifier like that. And then we just need to fix this slightly by adding an edge loop and then beveling that. And we're going to decrease the number of cuts just like that. And again, we just tweak this slightly if we need to. So go into the vertex selection mode, select these vertices and move it slightly upwards like that. And then we're going to go to the top view, Alt D to create a linked duplicate. And then we're going to move this along the y-axis to something like here. Now, the reason we did a linked duplicate is that if we make change to one of the object, for example, if I start moving this around, you can see how both of those objects are edited. So these are same, so we can just use a linked duplicate. And then for this top face, I'm going to select this one and then move this slightly on the y-axis and go into the side view. And then enable X-ray mode, and using the vertex selection mode, we're going to select this part like that, and then grab this along x-axis slightly. And if we need to increase the thickness, we can just use face selection mode to select these faces, and then grab this along the x-axis, z-axis like that. So there we have it. We have the table completed. Let's create a bookshelf in this area. And to do that, we're going to select the tile and then select this tile face, Shift D to duplicate, and then we can separate that by selection. Select that new face, and we're going to scale this along the x-axis, something like here. And then we're going to scale this along the y-axis slightly. Again, I'm sort of just fine-tuning the shape until I'm happy with it. And let's just grab and move it slightly like that. Let's just scale it down slightly. Okay, so we have the shape. Control R to add loop cuts, and we're going to add 2 loop cuts. And then we're going to bevel these slightly. And then delete the faces. Now we're going to press A to select everything and then extrude. A to select everything and add bevel weight. Okay, and then right click, set origin point to geometry. And then again tap into edit mode, duplicate this face, and then separate that by selection, and then select that new face. And we're going to scale it down along the y-axis to make it more square. And then we can just sort of scale it down even more. Okay, now go to the top view, G to grab and move it closer to this part of the object. And we can just grab it slightly to the ground like that. And then we can press E to extrude and move it up like that. A to select everything and add bevel weight. I think it's too thick, so let's go ahead and scale this by pressing S and then Shift Z to exclude the Z axis so that it's only scaling on 2 axes, like that. And then we're going to move this slightly up like that. And I think I should increase the thickness a little bit to make it more cute, like that. And again, we're going to go to the top view. So this is some sort of thing that where you fine tune it a little bit so that until it sort of looks better, you just eyeball it. And then we can just set origin points back to geometry so that it's easier to work with these. And then we're going to add a mirror modifier to this. So let's go ahead and under generate, add a mirror modifier. And then for the object, we're going to use these and we're going to enable this on the y-axis too. And then for this, we can add an array modifier. So under generate, let's add an array modifier. And then we're going to set this X value to 0. And then for Z, let's hold down the left mouse button and move it up like that and increase the number of copies. And then we can just keep fine-tuning this until we're happy with this. And we can grab it a little bit like that. Again, I think the size might be a bit not like the way we like it, so we can just fine-tune it if we need to later on. And it's going to be pretty simple. We just select everything and then we just sort of scale this, excluding the Z-axis, and then we will be able to do it. So Shift Z. For now I'm going to cancel out of it, because when we create more objects, then we'll be able to determine the size a little bit better. And I think we can also sort of create a few books on the bookshelf. That's going to be pretty easy. So let's go ahead and tap into edit mode, select the center face, duplicate and separate by selection, and then select that new object, tap into edit mode, select everything, and then we're going to scale it slightly on the y-axis like that. And then we're going to extrude it just a tiny bit like that. Okay, so we have an array modifier. We're going to go ahead and get rid of that from this new object. You to select everything and then add bevel weight. And again, we're going to fine tune the size a little bit until we're sort of happy with it. Now we can go ahead and press /, the key next to Shift key on the keyboard, and then we're going to select these three faces. Shift D to duplicate, right click to cancel, and then separate by selection. Select that new object, so it sort of isolates our object selection and it's easier to work with it. And then we can press that key again, and now we can tap into that new object. A to select everything, extrude along faces normal, S to enable even thickness, and let's go with something like that. A to select everything and add bevel weight. I think I'm going to increase the size a little bit. Again, I'm going to go into isolation mode by pressing /, and then we can press Alt S to shrink and fatten. Again, S to even thickness turned on, and then we can sort of increase so that it looks a bit better. And then we can end the isolation mode. Now we're going to go ahead and select this inner part, and we're going to scale it slightly. Actually, let's right click and set origin point to center, and then we can scale it down slightly, excluding the Z-axis, like that. And now with that inner part selected, we're going to shift click on the outer part and then press Ctrl P to open the parent menu, and then we're going to parent this. So what happens is that now if we select this outer object and move it around, you can see that the inner part is going to move along with it. And now we just need to position this better. So let's R to rotate along X-axis, and we're going to press 90 negative, so that is 90 degrees above the something like that. And then we're going to grab this along the Z-axis, rotate this along Z-axis 90 degrees, and we're going to set origin to geometry. Again, I'm going to rotate this 180 degrees. And we can press G to grab, Shift Z so that it doesn't move on the Z-axis and only on the X and Y axis, so that it's easier to move it on the ground like that. And then we can create more copies by pressing Shift D again, and we're going to sort of move it closer here, and then we can rotate this a little bit on the Y-axis like that, and then we can move it a bit closer up like that. Let's select, oops, we didn't create the copy for the inner part, so what we can do is, for this one it's going to be easy, we just move it like that. And for this one, let's just get rid of this and then select both of these, Shift D to duplicate, grab along the X-axis and then rotate along the Y-axis a little bit. And then we select these books, Shift D to duplicate along Z-axis like that. And then here we can rotate this along the Y-axis 90 degrees. And then we're going to make sure that these are placed properly like that. And then we just rotate along Z-axis slightly and just keep moving it on the ground like that. And let's go ahead and select this book, rotate this, whoops. Okay, so this one is still linked to this object, so we're going to press Alt P to separate and clear the parents. Oops. Alt P and clear the select the second option, clear and keep transform, and then we can just reparent this to this new object like that. And then we just select this object and rotate this along the z-axis like that, and then create one more copy and move it up like that, and rotate that again. Whoa, again, I forgot that the inner thing. I don't know why I keep forgetting that. Okay, let's move it up like that, and then we're gonna orbit that like that. I think that's too much. Let's go ahead and get rid of this one. Okay, I think this looks better. And then we can add more objects for decoration up here. So there we have our table and bookshelf created. Again, I'm going to go ahead and save the file, and then we can continue.